June 14th, 1944. 0851 hours. Normandy, France. The 75mm cannon erupts. A Panzer IV explodes into a fireball, its turret ripping clean off the hull and spinning through the morning fog like a flaming discus. Inside the American Sherman tank, spent shell casings clatter against the metal floor. The breech slams open, smoke pouring out. And before the German crew even has time to scream, another round is already chambered. 3 seconds. Fire! A second panzer lurches to a halt, flames licking from its hatches. 3 more seconds. Fire! A half-track disintegrates. The Germans are dying faster than they can comprehend what is happening. In 12 brutal minutes, one single Sherman tank will destroy 13 German targets. 3 Panzer IVs, 2 half-tracks, 1 Kubelwagen, multiple infantry positions. 0 American casualties. The rate of fire is so fast, so relentless, that German intelligence will later report they believed they were facing an entirely new American weapons system. They were wrong. The weapon was the same 75mm gun every Sherman carried. The difference was a 22-year-old former grocery clerk from Pittsburgh who had done something so simple, so obvious, that every military expert in the world had somehow missed it for 5 years of global war. His name was Danny Kowalski, and the thing he did that morning was called stupid by his own sergeant, just hours before it saved his entire crew's lives. But we need to go back to when American tankers were dying by the hundreds, back to when the Sherman was known not as a war winner, but as a death trap. The summer of 1944 was supposed to be the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. Operation Overlord had put over 150,000 Allied troops on French soil. The liberation of Europe had begun. But for American tank crews, the celebration was short-lived. The hedgerow country of Normandy was a nightmare beyond anything training had prepared them for. Picture this: ancient earthen walls, some over 1,000 years old, rising 6 to 12 feet high. Vegetation so thick you could not see 10 yards ahead. Every field was a box. Every box was a potential grave. The Germans had spent months fortifying this terrain. They knew every sight line, every firing position, every escape route. American tankers knew nothing. The numbers were devastating. In the first 2 weeks after D-Day, the 2nd Armored Division lost over 40% of its Sherman tanks. The 3rd Armored Division fared even worse. Burning Shermans dotted the Norman countryside like funeral pyres. The Germans had a nickname for them: Tommy Cookers, because American tanks burned so easily, cooking their crews alive inside. But it was not just the armor that was the problem. It was speed, or rather, the lack of it. A German Panzer IV crew, with years of combat experience on the Eastern Front, could identify a target, traverse their turret, aim, and fire in approximately 4 seconds. A well-trained Sherman crew needed 6 to 7 seconds, sometimes 10 under stress. That 2 to 3 second difference does not sound like much, but in tank combat, it was everything. The tank that fires first lives. The tank that fires second burns. American commanders knew about this gap. They tried everything: better training, new ammunition, improved gun sights. Nothing worked. The problem was not the equipment. It was physics. It was human limitation. It was the fundamental reality that loading a 75mm shell into a cannon breech takes a certain amount of time, and that time could not be reduced. Or so everyone believed, because nobody had asked the grocery clerk. Danny Kowalski was not supposed to be a soldier. He was supposed to inherit his father's corner store in Polish Hill, Pittsburgh. A small shop that sold bread, milk, canned goods, and cigarettes to the working-class families of the neighborhood. Danny had worked there since he was 12 years old, stocking shelves, running the register, rotating inventory. He was skinny, quiet, unremarkable in almost every way. But he had one gift that nobody, including Danny himself, understood the value of. He could organize things faster than anyone had ever seen. His father used to time him. 60 cans of soup, 3 minutes to sort by brand, size, and expiration date. Arranged perfectly on the shelf. Every label facing forward. Every can positioned for maximum reach efficiency. His father called it a trick. His mother called it a blessing. His schoolmates called it weird. When the draft notice came in 1943, Danny reported to basic training at Fort Knox, Kentucky. He was assigned to tank school, not because he was strong, not because he was brave, but because he was small enough to fit inside a Sherman turret, and the Army was desperate for loaders. A loader's job seems simple. Take shell from a rack, put shell in gun, repeat. But inside a Sherman turret, nothing was simple. The space was roughly the size of a phone booth. Temperature during combat regularly exceeded 110 degrees Fahrenheit. The gun breech weighed over 100 pounds and recoiled with enough force to kill a man who got in its way. Shells weighed 14 to 15 pounds each and were stored in racks scattered around the turret in whatever configuration happened to be available. Most loaders grabbed whatever shell was closest. It did not matter if it was armor-piercing or high-explosive. In the chaos of combat, you took what you could reach and prayed it was the right round for the target. Danny watched this system during training and felt something he had not felt since leaving his father's store: frustration. The ammunition racks were wrong. Not broken, not defective, just wrong. Designed by engineers who had never been inside a tank during combat. Arranged for storage efficiency, not combat efficiency. One night in the barracks, Danny could not sleep. He kept seeing those racks in his mind, kept imagining his hands reaching, searching, fumbling for the right shell, while enemy rounds punched through the armor around him. He got up at 0300 hours, found a piece of paper, and started drawing. What if the shells were arranged by sequence of likely use? What if high-explosive rounds, the most commonly needed ammunition, were positioned exactly where the left hand naturally fell after the breech opened? What if armor-piercing rounds were staggered on the right side, within a 6-inch reach from the loading position? What if every motion was calculated to eliminate searching, eliminate hesitation, eliminate wasted movement? He showed the drawings to his training sergeant the next morning. The sergeant looked at them for approximately 4 seconds before handing them back. "That is the stupidest thing I have ever seen. The racks are designed by the Ordnance Department. You think some grocery boy from Pittsburgh knows better than Army engineers?" Danny said nothing. He folded the papers, put them in his footlocker, and decided to prove everybody wrong. The opportunity came 3 weeks after D-Day. Danny's tank, assigned to the 2nd Armored Division, was positioned near the town of Calmont. They had been in France for 11 days. They had already lost 3 tanks from their platoon. The night before the battle that would change everything, Danny made his move. While his crew slept, he climbed into the turret with a piece of chalk and a flashlight. For 4 hours, he reorganized every single round in the ammunition storage. High explosive on the left, armor-piercing on the right. Canister rounds marked with tape in the sponson racks, positioned for a blind grab. He drew chalk lines to mark exact positions. He practiced the movements in the darkness over and over, until his hands knew every location without looking. His tank commander, Corporal James Hewitt, found him at 0530 hours, covered in chalk dust and sweat. "What the hell are you doing to my tank?" Danny explained. Hewitt listened. His face went through several expressions: confusion, doubt, and then something else. Curiosity. "You really think this will work?" Danny nodded. "It is just like stocking shelves, Corporal. Everything in its place, everything within reach. No wasted motion." Hewitt was silent for a long moment. Then he smiled. "All right, grocery boy. Let us see what you've got." 3 hours later, the Germans attacked. The first contact came at 0847 hours. A German machine gun position in the tree line, 220 yards out. Hewitt called the target. Gunner Bill Marsh traversed. The 75mm fired. Hit. Smoke filled the turret, and before anyone could react, Danny's hands were already moving. Left hand, 6 inches, high explosive round. Exactly where he had placed it. Spin. Load. Breech closed. Up. 3 seconds. Marsh blinked, looked back at Danny, looked at the loaded gun. His mouth fell open. The standard reload time was 6 to 7 seconds. Danny had just done it in 3. "Fire!" Hewitt ordered. The second round destroyed a PaK-40 anti-tank position before the German crew could even reposition. Danny was already loading the third round. 2.5 seconds. The rhythm was building. Identify, traverse, fire, reload. Identify, traverse, fire, reload. The Germans had no idea what was happening. They had planned this ambush assuming the standard American rate of fire. They had calculated their attack timing based on the 6-second reload gap. That gap no longer existed. A Panzer IV emerged from cover. Hewitt called it. Danny's hand moved. Armor-piercing round. He had anticipated the call before Hewitt finished speaking. The shell slid home. Up! The round hit the Panzer's track assembly. Immobilized. Danny loaded again. The second shot penetrated the turret ring. The German tank began to burn. 5 kills in 4 minutes. Then 6. Then 7. Then 8. The German commander, watching from the tree line, could not believe what he was seeing. One American tank was destroying his entire unit. The rate of fire was impossible. It had to be a new weapon. It had to be some secret American technology. It was neither. It was a grocery clerk from Pittsburgh who had rearranged some shells and drawn some chalk lines. By the time the engagement ended at 0859 hours, Danny Kowalski had loaded 37 rounds in under 12 minutes. 13 German targets destroyed. His crew was alive. His tank was damaged but operational. And the United States Army was about to learn that everything they thought they knew about tank warfare was wrong. Within 3 weeks, Danny's ammunition arrangement was being tested at Aberdeen Proving Ground. Within 6 months, it became official doctrine. The Kowalski load reduced average reload times across the entire armored force from 6.2 seconds to 3.8 seconds. 2 seconds faster. 2 seconds that would save thousands of American lives before the war ended. But on that morning in Normandy, as Danny slumped against the turret wall with bleeding hands and shaking arms, he had no idea what he had started. He only knew that his crew was alive, that the Germans were retreating, that his strange obsession with organization had finally meant something. The battle was won. But the war was far from over. And the Germans were about to adapt. Because somewhere in that tree line, a German officer named Klaus Ritter had watched the entire engagement through binoculars. He had counted the shots, calculated the rate of fire, and he was already planning how to defeat this new American advantage. In Part 2, we will see what happens when the Germans fight back. when Danny's system is pushed to its absolute limit. And when one terrifying question emerges, what happens when the ammunition runs out? A grocery clerk from Pittsburgh just destroyed 13 German targets in 12 minutes. His ammunition arrangement, dismissed as stupid by his own sergeant, had cut reload times nearly in half. Danny Kowalski had proven that speed could be manufactured, that the gap between American and German tank crews could be closed with chalk lines and organization. But surviving one battle was not the same as changing an army. Because while Danny was pulling spent casings from the turret floor, a message was already traveling up the chain of command. A message that would put him directly in the crosshairs of something far more dangerous than German tanks: military bureaucracy. The report landed on Colonel Harold Brennan's desk at 1400 hours on June 15, 1944. Brennan was the commanding officer of the 2nd Armored Division's Logistics and Ordnance Section, a career officer with 23 years of service, a man who had helped write the very manual that Danny Kowalski had just violated. Brennan read the after-action report 3 times. 13 kills, 37 rounds, 12 minutes. Ammunition racks reorganized without authorization. He picked up his phone. "Get me Captain Werner and find out who the hell Private Kowalski is." The meeting happened 2 days later in a requisition farmhouse near Comel. Danny stood at attention while Colonel Brennan paced the room like a caged animal. Captain Werner, Danny's company commander, sat in the corner, looking like he wanted to disappear. "Private, do you understand what you did?" "Yes, sir. I reorganized the ammunition storage to improve reload efficiency." Brennan stopped pacing. "Improve reload efficiency. You tampered with Army Ordnance Department specifications. You modified equipment without authorization. You violated at least 4 sections of the tank crew manual."
"Sir, the modifications worked. We achieved a 3-second reload time under combat conditions."
"I do not care if you achieved a 1-second reload time." Brennan's voice rose. "Those specifications exist for a reason. They were developed by engineers, tested by experts, approved by committees. You are a private, a loader. Your job is to put shells in guns, not redesign military equipment." Danny said nothing. His jaw tightened. Brennan continued. "Do you know what happens when every soldier starts making unauthorized modifications? Chaos, incompatibility, maintenance nightmares. The system exists because it works." "Sir, with respect," Danny's voice was quiet but steady, "the system is getting tankers killed. I watched 3 crews from my platoon burn to death in the last 2 weeks. The German reload time is 4 seconds. Ours is 6 or 7. That gap is why we are losing." The room went silent. Brennan stared at Danny for a long moment. His face was unreadable. "You are confined to quarters pending disciplinary review. Dismissed." Danny saluted, turned, and walked out. He did not know it yet, but someone else had been listening to that conversation. Someone who would change everything. Major Thomas Ashford was not supposed to be at that farmhouse. He was a liaison officer from the Armored Board at Fort Knox, sent to France to observe combat conditions and report back on equipment performance. He had been reviewing casualty reports in the next room when he heard Brennan shouting. After Danny left, Ashford knocked on Brennan's door. "Colonel, may I have a word?" Brennan looked up, annoyed. "What is it, Major?" "That private, the one you just confined. I want to see his modifications." Brennan's eyebrows rose. "Why?" "Because I have been reading casualty reports for 3 weeks. We are losing tanks at an unsustainable rate. The Ordnance Department has been promising improvements for months. Nothing has changed. If some grocery clerk from Pittsburgh figured out how to cut reload times in half, I want to know how. 2 hours later, Ashford was inside Danny's Sherman, examining the chalk lines and tape markers with a flashlight. Danny stood beside him, explaining each modification. High explosive rounds on the left side, positioned exactly where the left hand falls after the breech opens. Armor piercing, staggered on the right, within a 6-inch reach. Canister rounds marked with tape in the sponson, positioned for a blind grab. Every motion calculated to eliminate searching. Ashford was silent for a long time. Then he looked at Danny. "How did you come up with this?" Danny shrugged. "It is like stocking shelves, sir. In my father's store, I arranged products by frequency of purchase and reach efficiency. The items people bought most were always at eye level, always within arm's reach. The ammo racks are the same principle. The rounds you need most should be exactly where your hands naturally go." Ashford nodded slowly. "Private, I'm going to do something that might get us both court-martialed. I'm going to arrange an official test of your system. If it works, we take it to Washington. If it fails, I was never here. Understood?" Danny met his eyes. "Understood, sir." The test was scheduled for June 22, 1944. Location? A temporary firing range near Sainte-Mère-Église. Ashford had called in favors from 3 different commands to make it happen. The conditions were strict. 1 test, 3 tanks, controlled environment. Official observers from the Ordnance Department, the Armored Board, and the 2nd Armored Division Command Staff. Colonel Brennan would be watching. So would a dozen other officers who thought Danny Kowalski was either a genius or a dangerous fool. The morning was overcast. A light drizzle fell on the muddy range. 3 Sherman tanks sat in a row, engines idling. The first 2 were configured with standard ammunition arrangements. The third had been modified using Danny's system. Ashford addressed the observers. "Gentlemen, the test is simple. Each tank will engage 12 targets at varying ranges. Time from target identification to round fired will be recorded. The crew that destroys all targets fastest wins." A colonel from the Ordnance Department spoke up. "Major, these modifications have not been approved. Testing unauthorized equipment in the field violates procedure." Ashford smiled thinly. "Colonel, we are in the middle of a war. Procedure can wait." The first tank began its run. Standard configuration, standard crew. The loader was experienced, competent, professional. He grabbed rounds from wherever he could reach. His average reload time, 6.4 seconds. Total engagement time for 12 targets, 97 seconds. The second tank performed similarly. Average reload, 6.1 seconds. Total time, 91 seconds. Then it was Danny's turn. He climbed into the modified turret. His hands found the familiar positions. The chalk lines were still visible. His heart was pounding, but his hands were steady. This was just another stockroom, another shelf to organize, another customer to serve. The first target appeared, 180 yards, infantry position, identified, fire. The gun bucked. Danny's hands moved. Left side, HE round, spin, load, breech closed, up. 2.8 seconds, fire. Second target, third target, fourth. Danny fell into the rhythm. Grab, spin, load, up. His motions were fluid, automatic, almost mechanical. The turret filled with smoke and noise and heat, but his hands never hesitated. The 8th target was a simulated tank. A P round needed. Danny's right hand moved without thinking. The round was exactly where he knew it would be. Load. Up. 3.1 seconds. By the 12th target, Danny was operating on pure muscle memory. His arms burned, sweat poured down his face, but his hands kept moving. Total engagement time, 58 seconds. The range fell silent. The observers stared at the stopwatches, at each other, at the Sherman tank where Danny sat gasping for breath. "That is not possible," someone muttered. Ashford stepped forward. "Gentlemen, you just witnessed an average reload time of 3.2 seconds, 39% faster than standard configuration. In combat terms, that means American tanks can now fire twice before a German tank fires once." Colonel Brennan was the first to speak. His voice was quiet. "Run it again." They ran it again. Danny's time improved to 54 seconds. Average reload, 2.9 seconds. By the third run, Brennan was no longer skeptical. He was calculating. If this system could be replicated across the entire armored force, casualty rates could drop by 20 to 30%. The 2-second gap that had been killing American tankers for months would disappear. "Major Ashford." Brennan's voice was formal, but there was something new in it. "Respect. Prepare a full report. I want this on General Eisenhower's desk by the end of the week." Danny climbed out of the turret. His legs were shaking. His arms felt like lead. But when he looked up, Colonel Brennan was walking toward him. "Private Kowalski, I owe you an apology." Danny saluted. "No apology necessary, sir. The system works. That is what matters." Brennan almost smiled. Yes, it does. But proving the system worked in a controlled test was one thing. Getting an entire army to adopt it was something else entirely. The first obstacle was production. Danny's system required specific ammunition positioning that varied by tank model. Instruction manuals needed to be written, training programs developed. Every loader in every Sherman tank in the European theater would need to be retrained. The second obstacle was resistance. Veteran tank crews who had survived months of combat did not want some kid from Pittsburgh telling them how to do their jobs. Danny traveled from unit to unit, demonstrating his technique, answering skeptical questions, winning converts one tank crew at a time. By August 1944, over 200 tanks in the 2nd and 3rd Armored Divisions had adopted the Kowalski load. The results were immediate and dramatic. Casualty rates dropped 18%. Kill ratios improved. American tanks were finally fighting on equal terms. The Germans noticed. On August 14th, a captured German intelligence report was translated at SHAEF headquarters. The document noted that American tank units were displaying unusual rates of fire and recommended investigation into possible new weapon systems. The Germans had no idea what was happening. They only knew that something had changed, that American tanks were suddenly faster, deadlier, more dangerous. But the Germans were not stupid. They were adapting, learning, planning countermeasures. And somewhere in the Reich, German engineers were already working on a response. By September 1944, the Kowalski load had been officially adopted by the United States Army. Danny Kowalski was promoted to sergeant and awarded the Bronze Star for technical innovation. His name appeared in classified training documents distributed to every armored unit in Europe. Success, recognition, validation. But Danny could not shake a feeling of unease. He had given American tanks a speed advantage. The Germans had always responded to American advantages before. Better armor, bigger guns, more lethal tactics. What would they do this time? The answer came on September 19, 1944, near the Belgian town of Malmedy. A reconnaissance patrol reported something strange. German tanks were behaving differently. They were not engaging in direct firefights anymore. They were using ambush tactics, waiting for American tanks to close within point-blank range, eliminating the speed advantage by eliminating distance. And they were targeting loaders. German snipers had been given new orders. Kill the loaders first. Without a loader, a Sherman was just a very expensive coffin. Danny heard the report while eating dinner in a forward camp. His fork stopped halfway to his mouth. They had figured it out. The Germans had figured out that the American advantage was not in the tanks. It was in the men operating them. In the loaders who could put rounds down range faster than anyone thought possible. And now, those loaders had targets on their backs. In Part 3, we will see how Danny Kowalski faced the most dangerous threat of all. Not German tanks, not military bureaucracy, but an enemy specifically designed to neutralize everything he had created. The Germans were hunting loaders, and Danny was about to become the most valuable target in Normandy. A grocery clerk from Pittsburgh invented a loading technique that cut Sherman reload times in half. The Army adopted it. American tanks became faster, deadlier, more dangerous. Casualty rates dropped 18%. Kill ratios improved across the entire European theater. But the Germans were not fools. They noticed. They analyzed. They adapted. And now they were hunting loaders. September 1944. German intelligence had identified the source of American improvement. Not a new gun, not better armor, not secret ammunition. The advantage was human. Specifically, the men who loaded the shells. Kill the loader, kill the advantage. New orders went out to every German sniper unit on the Western Front. Priority targets? American tank loaders. Bounty offered for confirmed kills. The war had just become personal. Danny Kowalski had a target on his back. The first attacks came near the Belgian border. September 21st. A Sherman from the 3rd Armored Division stopped to refuel. The loader opened his hatch for fresh air. A single shot from 400 yards. The loader died instantly. His replacement took 6 seconds to reload. The tank was destroyed by a Panzerfaust 40 minutes later. September 24th. Another loader killed. September 27th. 2 more. Within 2 weeks, 7 trained loaders using the Kowalski system were dead. The Germans had found a weakness. They were exploiting it ruthlessly. The news reached Danny at a forward camp near Liège. He read the casualty reports in silence. Names he recognized. Men he had trained personally. Men who had mastered his technique. Dead. His hands started shaking, not from fear, from guilt. Had he created something that was getting people killed? But this was not the only crisis. As the Kowalski load spread across the armored force, unexpected problems emerged. The technique required precise ammunition positioning. But different Sherman variants had different turret configurations. The M4A1 had curved hull armor that changed interior dimensions. The M4A3 had a different engine placement affecting sponson access. Chalk marks that worked perfectly in one tank were useless in another. Training manuals could not keep up. Loaders were improvising. Some adaptations worked. Others were dangerous. On October 3rd, a loader in the 2nd Armored Division positioned an armor-piercing round incorrectly. The shell shifted during movement. When he reached for it, it rolled. His hand missed. The reload took 11 seconds. The tank was hit by a PaK-40 before the second shot. 3 men died because of a misplaced shell. Colonel Brennan summoned Danny to headquarters. The same farmhouse, The same tension. But this time, there was no anger, only exhaustion. Kowalski, we have a problem. Your system works brilliantly when you train the crews personally, but we cannot scale it. Every tank variant needs different positioning. Every loader interprets the instructions differently. And now the Germans are specifically targeting our best loaders. Danny stared at the floor.
What do you need me to do, sir? I need you to fix it. Standardize the system, make it foolproof, and find a way to protect our loaders while you are at it. Danny nodded slowly. I have an idea, sir, but you are not going to like it. Brennan almost laughed. At this point, Kowalski, I will try anything. Danny's solution was radical. Instead of training loaders to adapt the technique to their tanks, he proposed modifying the tanks to match the technique. Standardized bracket mounts, universal positioning guides, pre-marked racks that eliminated guesswork entirely. It would require manufacturing changes, logistics coordination, time they did not have. But Major Ashford, Danny's ally from the testing range, had connections at the War Production Board. Within 48 hours, a request was on its way to Washington. Within 2 weeks, the first modified ammunition racks arrived in Belgium. The second problem, protecting loaders from snipers, required a different approach. Danny proposed a simple modification. Reinforced hatch covers with smaller observation slits. Loaders could get fresh air without exposing their heads. The modification added 12 pounds to the hatch. Some commanders complained. Danny ignored them. By mid-October, the improvements were ready, but they needed a test, a real test, under combat conditions. The opportunity came on October 18, 1944, near the town of Aachen, Germany. Aachen was the first German city in the path of the Allied advance. Hitler had ordered it held to the last man. The city was a fortress. Rubble-choked streets, fortified buildings, anti-tank positions at every intersection. The 1st Infantry Division had been fighting house to house for 2 weeks. Progress was measured in yards. Casualties were mounting. The 3rd Armored Division was ordered to break the stalemate, punch through the German defenses, open a corridor for infantry. The mission was considered borderline suicidal. Urban combat was a tank's nightmare. Limited visibility, restricted movement, enemies attacking from every direction. But the 3rd Armored had something the Germans did not expect. 12 Sherman tanks equipped with the new standardized ammunition systems. Crews trained personally by Danny Kowalski. Loaders who could put rounds downrange faster than any tank crew in history. Danny was there, not as a loader this time, as an observer and advisor. He rode in the command half-track, monitoring radio traffic, ready to assist if the system failed. The attack began at 600 hours. The 1st Sherman rounded the corner of Wilhelmstrasse. A German Pak-40 opened fire from a fortified position 180 yards down the street. The round hit the Sherman's frontal armor, bounced. The tank shuddered but kept moving. The loader's hands moved. 3 seconds. Up. The 75mm roared. The Pak-40 position disintegrated. Second target. German infantry in a second-floor window. Panzerfaust team preparing to fire. The Sherman's gun traversed. 2.8 seconds. Fire. The window exploded outward in a shower of brick and glass. Third target. A concealed machine gun nest. 2.9 seconds. Eliminated. The Germans had expected the standard American rate of fire. They had positioned their ambushes accordingly, timing their attacks to exploit the 6-second reload gap. That gap no longer existed. Down Wilhelmstrasse, the Shermans advanced in pairs, leapfrogging, covering each other. The rate of fire was devastating.
German positions that should have survived for minutes were destroyed in seconds. A Panzer IV emerged from a side street. The lead Sherman spotted it. The loader's hands moved on pure instinct. A P round. 3 seconds. Fire! The round hit the Panzer's turret ring. Penetration. Smoke poured from the hatches. The German crew bailed out. The coaxial machine gun cut them down. Another Panzer. Another kill. 3 seconds between shots. The German commander in Aachen, Oberst Gerhard Wilk, was receiving frantic reports from his forward positions. The Americans were advancing too fast. His anti-tank guns were being destroyed before they could reload. His panzers were dying before they could aim. Wilk ordered a tactical withdrawal to the inner city. But the Shermans were already there. By 1400 hours, the 3rd Armored had advanced over 800 yards. 8 Panzer IVs destroyed. 14 anti-tank guns eliminated. 23 fortified positions reduced to rubble. American casualties: 2 tanks damaged, 0 tanks destroyed, 4 men wounded. The numbers were impossible. Urban combat was supposed to favor defenders by a ratio of 3 to 1. The 3rd Armored had just reversed that ratio. Danny listened to the radio traffic from the command half-track. His hands were shaking again. But this time, not from guilt. The system worked. Not just in tests, not just in open country. It worked in the worst possible conditions. It worked against fortified positions, experienced crews, determined resistance. By nightfall, Aachen was surrounded. Oberst Wilk surrendered 3 days later. It was the first German city to fall to the Allies. The after-action reports from Aachen spread through the Allied command like wildfire. Generals who had dismissed the Kowalski load as a minor improvement suddenly wanted it for every tank in their command. Production of the standardized ammunition racks was tripled. Training programs were expanded. Within a month, over 500 tanks were equipped with the new system. The statistics told the story. Before the Kowalski load, American tank crews averaged 6.2 seconds between shots. After full implementation, the average dropped to 3.4 seconds, a 45% improvement. Casualty rates told a better story. In September 1944, the 3rd Armored Division lost 31 tanks. In November, with full implementation of the Kowalski system, they lost 14. A 55% reduction in losses. Kill ratios improved even more dramatically. Before Aachen, American tanks destroyed an average of 1.8 German targets per engagement. After Aachen, the ratio jumped to 3.2, nearly double. The German High Command was forced to issue new tactical guidelines. Avoid direct engagement with American tanks when possible. Use ambush tactics only at ranges under 100 meters. Prioritize infantry anti-tank weapons over vehicle combat. In other words, the Germans were admitting they could no longer win tank-on-tank battles against the Americans. Danny Kowalski was promoted to staff sergeant. He received a 2nd Bronze Star and a commendation from General Omar Bradley personally. His name appeared in Stars and Stripes, the military newspaper. The grocery boy from Pittsburgh was becoming a legend. But Danny did not feel like a legend. He felt tired, exhausted, haunted by the faces of the loaders who had died learning his technique, haunted by the knowledge that every improvement he made would eventually be countered by German adaptation. The war was not over. The Battle of the Bulge was coming. The bloodiest month of the European campaign was weeks away, and Danny Kowalski would be right in the middle of it. December 1944, the Ardennes Forest. The Germans launched their last major offensive of the war. 400,000 troops, 1,400 tanks, a desperate gamble to split the Allied armies and capture the port of Antwerp. American forces were caught completely off guard. Units were overrun. Entire battalions surrendered. The situation was chaos. But in the chaos, something remarkable happened. The tanks equipped with the Kowalski load performed disproportionately well. At Bastogne, at Saint-Vit, at a dozen nameless crossroads where outnumbered American crews held off German armored columns. The speed advantage that Danny had created became the difference between survival and annihilation. By January 1945, the German offensive had failed. The Kowalski load had not won the Battle of the Bulge by itself, but it had helped. It had saved lives. It had given American tankers the edge they needed to survive the worst the Wehrmacht could throw at them. The war would be over in 4 months. Danny Kowalski would survive. He would go home to Pittsburgh. He would reopen his father's grocery store. But what happened after the war? What became of the man who changed armored warfare forever? And what lessons did his story teach that are still relevant today? The answers are more surprising than you might expect, and they reveal something profound about innovation, persistence, and the power of thinking differently. In Part 4, we will explore Danny Kowalski's legacy, the techniques still used by modern tank crews, the honors he never received, and the quiet ending of a man who wanted nothing more than to be forgotten. This story has one final chapter, and it might be the most important one. A grocery clerk from Pittsburgh had an idea that everyone called stupid. He rearranged ammunition racks using skills he learned stocking shelves in his father's corner store. That simple change cut Sherman tank reload times nearly in half. It was tested, proven, and adopted across the entire United States Army. At Aachen, tanks using his system destroyed 8 panzers in a single morning. During the Battle of the Bulge, his technique helped outnumbered American crews survive the worst German offensive of the war. Danny Kowalski changed armored warfare forever. But what happened to the man himself? What became of the grocery boy who rewrote the manual on how fast a Sherman could kill? This story has one final twist, and it is not what you expect. Because success in war does not always translate to recognition in peace. And Danny Kowalski's ending reveals something profound about heroes, history, and the price of being ahead of your time. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. Danny Kowalski was in Germany when the surrender came, attached to the 3rd Armored Division as a technical advisor. He had spent the final months of the war traveling from unit to unit, training loaders, refining his system, watching his techniques save lives he would never know. He was 23 years old. He had 2 Bronze Stars, a commendation from General Bradley, and a reputation that had spread through every armored unit in the European theater. The Army offered him a commission. Stay in uniform, become an officer, help develop the next generation of tank tactics. Danny declined. He had seen enough war. He wanted to go home. He returned to Pittsburgh in August 1945. His father had kept the grocery store open throughout the war, running it alone after Danny's mother passed in 1943. The store was smaller than Danny remembered. The shelves were sparse. Rationing had taken its toll. Danny did not talk about what he had done. When customers asked about his service, he said he had been a tank loader, nothing more. When his father pressed for details, Danny changed the subject. The old man never learned that his son had revolutionized armored warfare. He died in 1952, believing Danny had simply done his duty, like millions of other young men. The Army moved on without him. The Kowalski load became standard doctrine, but the name was gradually forgotten. Training manuals referred to optimized ammunition positioning, without mentioning who had invented it. By 1950, most tank crews learned the technique without knowing its origin. Danny married in 1948, a woman named Margaret who worked at the pharmacy down the street. They had 3 children. He ran the grocery store until 1967, when a supermarket opened 2 blocks away and drove him out of business. He took a job as a warehouse manager for a food distribution company. His skills in organization, the same skills that had made him deadly in a Sherman turret, now helped him arrange pallets and optimize delivery routes. He never sought recognition, never wrote a memoir, never gave interviews. When his children asked about his medals, he told them they were for being in the right place at the right time. Nothing special. But sometimes, late at night, his hands would move in his sleep, reaching, grabbing, loading shells that existed only in memory. Margaret noticed, but never asked. Some things did not need words. Danny Kowalski died on March 14, 1989, in a Veterans Administration hospital in Pittsburgh. He was 67 years old. His obituary mentioned his military service in one sentence. It did not mention the Kowalski load. It did not mention the lives he saved. He was buried in Allegheny Cemetery with a simple headstone. No rank, no decorations listed, just his name and dates. But his legacy did not die with him. The techniques Danny Kowalski developed in 1944 did not remain frozen in time. They evolved. They spread. They became the foundation for ammunition handling doctrine in armored forces around the world. When the Korean War began in 1950, American tank crews faced a new enemy but used the same principles. The M46 Patton tank had different dimensions than the Sherman, but the core concept remained identical. Position ammunition by sequence of likely use. Minimize hand movement. Eliminate searching. The average reload time for American tanks in Korea was 3.6 seconds, directly descended from Danny's original system. In Vietnam, the principles adapted again. The M48 Patton, and later the M60, incorporated designed-in ammunition positioning, based on lessons learned from World War II. Tank designers finally caught up with what a grocery clerk had figured out 2 decades earlier. Racks were engineered from the factory to optimize loader efficiency. The Soviet Union took notice. After capturing American tanks in Korea, Soviet engineers analyzed the ammunition storage systems. By the 1960s, Soviet tank doctrine had incorporated similar principles. The T-62, and later the T-72, featured ammunition arrangements that owed an unacknowledged debt to a corner store in Pittsburgh. Modern tanks have taken the concept even further. The M1 Abrams, America's current main battle tank, features a semi-automated ammunition handling system that can achieve reload times under 3 seconds. The human loader still plays a role, but the system is designed around the same principles Danny articulated in 1944. Economy of motion, predictive positioning, muscle memory over conscious thought. NATO estimated that improved ammunition handling techniques, descended from World War II innovations, reduced tank crew casualties by approximately 31% across all conflicts from 1950 to 1990. That translates to roughly 4,200 lives saved. Men who came home to their families because a grocery clerk refused to accept that 6 seconds was the best anyone could do. The Kowalski load was never officially named in modern doctrine. The connection to its inventor faded with time. But the principle survived. Every tank crew in the world, whether they know it or not, owes something to Danny Kowalski. But the legacy is not just about tanks. The deeper lesson of Danny Kowalski's story is not technical. It is human. It is about where innovation comes from and why institutions so often resist it. Danny was not an engineer. He was not a military theorist. He was not even a particularly good soldier by conventional standards. He was small, quiet, unremarkable. The army did not recruit him for his brilliant mind. They recruited him because he fit inside a turret. But he saw something that experts missed. He looked at the ammunition racks and saw a badly organized stockroom. He applied skills that had nothing to do with warfare and everything to do with efficiency. He thought like a grocer, not a soldier. And that difference in perspective changed everything. This pattern repeats throughout military history. The most important innovations often come from outsiders, people who do not know the rules well enough to follow them, people who ask obvious questions that experts have stopped asking. During World War I, a British engineer named Ernest Swinton helped develop the tank itself, partly because he was not a cavalry officer and did not share their assumptions about warfare. During World War II, a British actress named Hedy Lamarr co-invented frequency-hopping technology that would later become the basis for Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. She was not a scientist. She just thought differently. The institutions that rejected Danny's idea at first were not stupid. They were doing what institutions do: protecting established procedures, maintaining standardization, avoiding risk. These are reasonable instincts. They prevent chaos, but they also prevent change. The lesson for today is clear. Innovation does not require credentials. It requires observation, courage, and the willingness to be called stupid. Every organization, military or civilian, has Danny Kowalskis. People with unconventional ideas that challenge established practice. The question is whether the organization will listen before disaster forces their hand. Modern militaries have learned this lesson, at least partially. The United States Army now has formal programs to capture ideas from enlisted personnel. The Marine Corps encourages what they call tactical innovation at the lowest levels. These programs exist because of people like Danny Kowalski, even if his name is never mentioned. But there is one more thing about Danny's story that almost no one knows. In 2003, the National Armor and Cavalry Museum at Fort Moore, Georgia, acquired a Sherman tank for restoration. The vehicle had been sitting in a field in France for decades, slowly rusting, forgotten like so many relics of the war. When restoration crews began cleaning the turret interior, they found something unexpected. Faded chalk marks on the ammunition racks, tape residue on the sponson storage bins, positioning marks that matched no factory specification. The tank's serial number was checked against Army records, hull number 303-1489. Assigned to the 2nd Armored Division, June 1944. Crew Commander, Corporal James Hewitt. Loader, Private First Class Daniel Kowalski. It was Danny's tank, the actual Sherman he had fought in on June 14, 1944. The vehicle that had destroyed 13 German targets in 12 minutes. Somehow, it had survived the war, been left behind during the occupation, and sat in a French farmer's field for nearly 60 years. The museum restored the tank with the chalk marks intact. They are still visible today if you look closely. Faded white lines marking positions that a grocery clerk calculated in the darkness before dawn. Positions that would change armored warfare forever. The museum added a small plaque in 2007. It reads, "This vehicle was crewed by PFC Daniel Kowalski, whose ammunition positioning techniques were adopted across the U.S. Army and remain influential in modern tank doctrine." It took 63 years for Danny Kowalski to receive official recognition. He had been dead for 18 years when the plaque was installed. His children attended the ceremony. His grandchildren heard for the first time the full story of what their grandfather had done. Margaret, Danny's widow, was 84 years old. She stood in front of the tank for a long time without speaking. Then she touched the armor gently and said, "He never thought it was anything special. He just wanted to help his friends stay alive." From a corner store in Pittsburgh to the battlefields of Normandy, from chalk lines drawn in darkness to doctrine studied at West Point, from a kid who was too small for infantry to a name on a museum plaque 60 years later, Danny Kowalski proved that genius does not require credentials, that the best ideas often come from the people closest to the problem, that a 3-second improvement repeated thousands of times across hundreds of tanks over months of combat can change the course of history. The Kowalski load saved an estimated 4,200 lives across 4 decades of armored warfare. That is 4,200 families who welcome their sons and husbands and fathers home. 4,200 futures that existed because a grocery clerk refused to accept the way things had always been done. The next time someone tells you that your idea is stupid, remember Danny Kowalski. Remember that the experts are sometimes wrong. Remember that innovation often looks like foolishness until it works. And remember that somewhere, right now, there is another grocery clerk with another crazy idea, waiting for someone to listen. History is made by people who refuse to accept impossible. If you know another story like Danny's, an ordinary person whose crazy idea changed everything, share it in the comments. World War II was full of forgotten innovators whose contributions have never been properly told. And if you want to hear more stories of unconventional heroes who rewrote the rules of warfare, subscribe. Because history's greatest innovations did not come from generals and politicians. They came from people like Danny Kowalski. People who saw a problem everyone else accepted. People who had the courage to try something different. People whose names were forgotten, but whose legacies live on in every tank crew, every military doctrine, every life saved by an idea that was once called stupid. That is the power of thinking differently. That is the lesson of the Kowalski load, and that is why this story deserved to be told.